Good morning. Thank you for being here at ChangeNOW. So just a minute ago, Rhaenyra explained that redesigning the food system, changing the way we are producing, distributing, and actually eating food can make a big difference, can stop harming the planet, and actually restore our ecosystems, maybe. But it's a journey, so we're going to go through that journey together. And as the title of our session says, from field to table, I suggest we start with fields, with the supply side of the story. And maybe I'm turning to you, Santiago. You're Santiago Gowland, the CEO of the Rainforest Alliance. It's a very well-known international non-profit organization working at the intersection of business, agriculture, and forests, right? So please tell us more about yourself, your organization, and what is it that you do to make things change on the supply side of the story.
Thank you, Catherine. And yeah, I mean, probably you know the Rainforest Alliance from the green frog, right? I remember when I was at Unilever many years ago, when I started my career on sustainability, I was and I was living in London, I was a big fan of the Rainforest Alliance. I loved the follow the frog and also the simplification of these choices, you know, as a consumer. But then life went on, and 3 years ago I was asked to join the organization and lead these 800 people that work across 50 countries on this very question: how do we change the way we do produce food today, right? And the forestry side of the Rainforest Alliance. And the beauty about, or what I love about the Rainforest Alliance is they work on these two levers, supply and demand, because you can't change a market if you don't change the supply, you know, in what you produce, and also how you consume it. You need to change the two, and they need to be reinforcing each other in order to transform the market. So we work with 4 million farmers on the supply side, and then on the community and landscape project, 3 million more farmers, and also with 5,000 companies on the demand side. So it's been working for 35 years on driving practices to transform the way we do agriculture. And why? Because when you look at the theme of today, and I've been hearing in many other panels the same question, right now, around 45% of people can't afford a healthy diet. In countries like mine, I come from Argentina, it's 86%, right? So in developing countries, it's even bigger, the issue of people lacking the main nutrition to develop the brain and their, potential as human beings. And the reason why is because these industrialized systems that have been driving agriculture, in a way, they've been sort of killing the nutrition of the soil, right, and the health of the soil, leaving land barren to a point where when you don't have nutrition in the soil, you don't have nutrition in the food. It's as simple as that. The biology, the richness of the soil, the carbon inside the soil is what drives the nutrition of the food you eat. That's a correlation. But the amazing thing, as you were saying on the MacArthur Foundation, and I've been hearing also around this, the amazing thing is that it can be the opposite. I mean, like, if you apply regenerative practices and farming in the soil, you can actually boost the nutrition of those ingredients. And by doing that, also have probably the most powerful tool to tackle the triple crisis of climate, biodiversity, and social development, because by insetting or sinking carbon in the soil, you're using the biggest nature-based, in a way, asset, which is land extension, right? And using it as a carbon sequestration mechanism. And also the whole biology of the soil, the biodiversity of the soils, and the protection of the forests also boost biodiversity. But as was also mentioned before, it boosts productivity. So it makes income for producers more attractive, right? And I've seen this in many farms that work with the Rainforest Alliance, like, for example, Aquiares in Costa Rica. It's one of the biggest farms we work with on coffee. It's just amazing. We've been working with them for 17 years, so they're very, very evolved. But you can see how the way they are farming using the Rainforest Alliance regenerative agriculture framework, the way they are farming the coffee, and the way they are connecting ecological corridors for biodiversity, and the way they are looking at the brand and the premiumization of the product is really having results. So I'll stop there, just saying at the end of the day, it is a complex problem that requires companies, as you know, what was your name, the name of the MacArthur Foundation?
Rhaenyra O'Donnell.
That was kind of brilliant, because I mean, it's like that design of how you designed your products, you know, for regeneration of soils and communities requires companies to lead on this agenda, governments to align incentives, you know, also consumers to be informed, because they have a right to know and a right to choose what to do, and also the NGO and all the kind of the social sector to work better together, you know, in stronger alliances.
We'll come to consumers in a minute. First, maybe Allon. Thank you so much, Santiago. Allon, you're the global leader and managing director of Quantis. Quantis is a Swiss consulting firm, is that right? Helping large companies in their sustainable transformation. But you're also the ex-former CEO of Naturalia, which is in France, I think, the leading retailer in organic food. What's your take about that necessary evolution on the supply side of the food chain?
Thanks. I'm very happy to be here. I would say first that we can be positive, because I think change is happening as you describe it in the farm you mentioned. But in the Western world, the sustainability, you know, is happening in the food business. Let's take like the three main shifts that need to happen. One is going to organic or regenerative practices. The other might be to reduce meat production, and third one might be, you know, having less processed foods or packaged foods. And it's actually happening. You know, our organic food, you mentioned it, I've been in the business for 10 years, and it's been growing double digits in every European country for the past 20 years, and reaching some quite good level now. Meat, you have a number of alternatives to meat products in milk or in whatever you can eat that is amazing, both from large companies and startups. So clearly, it's happening right now from companies that are really driving the change. Then comes, you know, is it faster? Or say differently, can we go faster and deeper because we need to? And maybe three things that needs to happen to do so. One is about regulation. Second one is about companies working more deeply with sustainable and incorporating in everything that they do. And third one is about technological shifts. First one, regulation, it's obvious, but it actually works. You know, while I was in an organic business in 2019, there was this law that prevented organic producer of vegetables to use heated greenhouses. You have to know that heated greenhouses make it 8 times more impactful than non-unheated greenhouses. And, you know, just regulation stopped it. So, you know, when it's rightly designed, regulation do have an impact immediately. Second is about how you incorporate the sustainability in everything that we do. That's exactly what we are doing at Quantis, for example, with all the clients that we are supporting. It's about ensuring that you have the right data to measure the impact, because it's quite complicated actually to measure the impact, especially if you take into account not only climate, but also biodiversity, water, etc. And then how do we incorporate it in everything you do, design, pricing, allocation of marketing, etc. But actually it's happening right now. And just for an example of this, you know, because it was announced this morning, Unilever, you know, has decided to exit from ice cream because it's not, it's too intensive in terms of climate. So it's actually happening, and people are, companies are actually divesting from this kind of too impactful businesses. And last but not least is about technical shifts. It needs to happen. Plant-based solution will happen. Regenerative also is some kind of craftsman work right now. Needs to go at scale. It will need more digitalized, mechanized solutions to be at scale. So technical digital shift will bring a lot, and I think Julius can talk more about it.
Yes, thank you for the transition, Julius. Your turn. What do you do at FoodLabs to make things change? What's cooking in your labs?
Yeah, at FoodLabs we invest in startups along the entire value chain of food and agriculture, and usually investing quite early, meaning coming in as the first institutional investor. What I found quite interesting so far is we've been speaking a lot about the system as it is right now and how we can improve it. Things like, for example, regenerative agriculture, I think, are very promising, and we've also invested in companies in that space, and definitely believe that the future of farming has to be more regenerative and also more sustainable. Santiago, you, for example, mentioned the problem that our soils are depleting, and obviously if there are no more nutrients in our soils, there also won't be any nutrients in our food that we eat every day. Another thing that we at FoodLabs are also quite excited about is sort of the decoupling of food from the field. There's this term of lab-grown meat, for example. Mm-hmm. So, for example, if we look at the whole market of proteins, I think so far we have the animal-based proteins, and then we have the plant-based proteins that you just mentioned, Allon. But at the same time, there's also a lot of very motivated founders out there that try to, in the end, harness science and, for example, microbes to come up with new ways to produce proteins. So new technologies like, for example, fermentation or also cell cultivation are topics that we at FoodLabs at least believe will play a more and more important role in the future.
Tell us more about that. What about fermentation? What's all the hype about that?
Yeah, so for example, when looking at fermentation, one technology that I think is very exciting is the whole topic of mycelium. So mycelium are the roots of mushrooms. And by fermenting them, you can get meat replacements that in the end are very similar in taste and also in texture compared to traditional animal-based meats. And at the same time, production is much more sustainable, less land is required, less water is required, there's less greenhouse gas emissions in the process. And it's also circular. We had the topic of circular economy in the keynote right before. So I think a great example is we have a portfolio company called FoodLabs. They're working with mycelium, and one of their investors is a quite big German brewery. And as of today, they have a lot of brewer spent grain, which is sometimes used as animal feed, but also oftentimes just thrown away, despite being a quite valuable resource. So now we have a company like FoodLabs coming in that can use it as feedstock for their production systems and upcycling those nutrients ingredients for, in the end, more nutritious and also more sustainable proteins.
Well, thank you so much. It's exciting, exciting perspectives ahead. So let's switch to the demand side of the issue. How can people change what they consume? You tell us about what is expecting them. They have to change how they consume. They have to change what they consume. Allon, as the former CEO of Naturalia, you know quite a bit about retail and about consumers and their behavior. What do you think?
It's very frustrating. Very, very frustrating because you try to convey stories to the consumers and you try to change the habits, but it does not work. Let's come back to this story about meat. So meat alternatives, there are like a ton of them. You know, as I said, as you described, you know, on the supply side, you can buy everything that you want in terms of meat alternatives. Actually, does the switch happen? No. Not sufficiently deeper. So the key question is, you know, we have explained why it's not bad, what it needs to happen, but it does not happen. So coming to your question about at the end, you know, actually, yes, we can do, but actually it does not happen. So key question is, how do you do that? Yeah. Actually, maybe I would still be at Natural if I had the answer, because it would be like, you know, thriving like hell. So it's very complicated answer. But let's say there are at least, I think, also three answers to this one. First is we have a global plan, a global national plan to push right. Second is you have, as a private company, to have a simple solution. and you have to have solutions that provide actual benefits for the consumer. Let me go into each of one. First one is clear. You have to have a national plan that does encompass not only nutritional elements or private interests from agricultural bodies, but also, and you have to encompass those two, but also sustainability into it. Meaning that you have to have, we have national plan in France, I mean in the UK every country has its own. You have to incorporate into it to reduce your meat production. You have to increase much more the education that goes with it. And when I mean education, it's not about children, but also about grown up, etc. So it's about public body encompassing the sustainability into what they do. Second one is about make it simple. I've been a retailer, as you said, for 10 years. And actually, I think you mentioned it also when you make your speech. A consumer, when he goes through the LS, he has maybe a tenth of a second to make his decision. Whatever you put in the pack doesn't make any impact. You just have to put, a green flag, or red flag, and that's it. Anything else, don't bother, because he has 1/10 of a second. So be very simple. And there is some apps like Yuka that some of you may know if you are depending on your country that provide with a very simple information, but you still have to flash it. So the more simple, the easier to change the consumer, because and actually let's face it, the attention of the consumer is reducing every year. So red or green flags, that's it. And last but not least is about also the benefits that you provide. You cannot, nature can only be, it's never going to be the only criteria through which you will buy a food. You need nutrition, because nutrition is necessary for what we buy food. Price is a one. Taste is another one, depending on the country, but in France it's very high in the list. Sustainability is part of it, and maybe also can make it eat it is the fifth one. So there are a number of criteria. And actually, if you want to buy sustainability, you have to tackle all those criteria. You cannot just come with, when I was an organic retailer, people would come with Fevrol. For those who know it, it's some food that we give to the horses. So yes, it's good in terms of proteins, it's cheap, but nobody will eat it. So you have to tackle all of the five of it and provide with very good value proposition if you want to, for the people to buy it.
Okay, thank you, Allon. Makes sense, right? At the end of the day, you have to eat what's in your plate. So if it's not palatable, you won't try it. Julius, what do you know about consumers? You need to know those, because otherwise everything that's cooking in your labs won't work, right? So did you study them? What do you know about them?
Yeah, I think one topic that we discuss quite a lot internally is the whole topic of gene modification and how or whether consumers are actually going to accept that and be willing to buy products that are or have been gene modified in their production process.
Okay.
I think as of today, GMO still has a very bad reputation overall, and consumers are quite hesitant. However, at the same time, I think there are many, many examples out there that show that already in our system, our food production system today, it is being used and consumers are accepting it. To give one example, for producing cheese or dairy products, you need an enzyme called rennet, which has traditionally been sourced from the stomach of calves. So not a very eco-friendly and then also animal-friendly process. Until a couple or many years ago by now, there was a new process being developed using microbials and more specifically mostly bacteria and gene modification to actually produce that enzyme that then breaks down the cheese and is a vital component of producing cheese. And I think today, as of today, already like 98 or 99% of the cheese that's being sold in the US is being produced by using this gene-modified rennet, which I think is a great example for how consumers in the end are willing to adopt. However, I think there's also a lot of education going to be needed. Especially here in Europe, we are quite hesitant, or many say quite slow in admitting new products that have been gene-modified. So for example, in our portfolio, I think all of the companies that have or are working on new and alternative proteins are usually going to Singapore first, or maybe to the US to enter the market, because there the admission process is much, much faster. my hope at least is that, I mean, they have to go through the regulatory process in Europe now as well. And at FoodLabs, we hope that once they also have the approval in Europe, it's also a good sign of, or in the end, a good sign for the consumers, because as said, in Europe, they're a bit more cautious. There's more regulatory processes in place. But once you get through all of those processes and get your products admitted, I think it should be quite strong in the end, indicator for consumers that what they are able to buy then is safe.
When we spoke before, you told me you're not a big fan of insects. You're not working too much with insects, although it's one of the most debated food of the future, well known of the audience. What do you think?
I mean, at least as FoodLabs, we haven't invested in any insect-based protein so far. I think there are good concepts out there, strong companies. However, from a venture perspective, at least so far, we haven't found a case that fully convinced us. I think mostly because in the end, it's still very capex intensive. In a way, it is a dirty process still. You still have animals in the value chain. You know, if you look at, I don't know, fermentation, at cell cultivation, I guess one of the main drivers behind those technologies is that in the end, you want to take the animal out of the production system. And in the end, insects, they might not be as cute as, I don't know, a cow, for example, but it's still an animal.
They are still animals. Thank you, Julius. Santiago, what do you think? Now, I think the Rainforest Alliance has a global approach, right? As you said before, holistic approach, inclusive of consumers.
Yeah, I think it started with knowledge that to change a market, you need to change supply and demand, as I said before, right? Now, in the case of food companies, fast-moving consumer goods companies like Unilever, Mars, Hershey's, etc., 80% of the value is on the intangible assets, on the brand. If you don't engage and lead with the brand as well as the supply, you can't really see transformation at speed and scale we need, right? So, you know, the question then, for me in the food sector, is a bit simpler than in other sectors, like, you know, personal care or home care, etc. Why? Because the beauty of the food sector is that the care that you put into the supply, the production of your raw materials, the carbon you insert in the ground, the nutrition in the soil, the health in the soil, is directly connected to the quality and the nutrition of the product. So you have a reinforcing loop between your investment and effort on the supply with the functional benefits, the consumer benefits. It's a healthier product, it's a kind of more nutritious product, more sustainable one, so it reinforces your brand proposition. And this reinforcing loop hardly exists in other categories. For example, if you're a shampoo brand and you say, I'm going to reduce plastic, it seems great, reduce plastic, but it won't do anything for your hair. I mean, it's kind of completely disconnected from the consumer benefit, functional benefit, may have an emotional benefit, right? So for me, really, I mean, like unlocking this kind of a brand and demand piece of this equation is a huge opportunity. I believe that, you know, in the Rainforest Alliance, we really believe that consumers have a right to know, and they have a right to choose. And you were talking, Allon, about the simplification, right? The seal of the Rainforest Alliance that has been there for, you know, for a long time, it's an amazing simplifier, because behind that seal, there is a very robust program that looks at climate, biodiversity, social development, etc., in an integrated way, right? So it really kind of allows that, you know, quick choice by the consumer, knowing that that's going to be better. So my kind of recommendation on this one is, like, maybe in the next 10 years, 3 things need to happen. The first one is sustainability inside companies. For anybody that is working on companies here, needs to be integrated, like the chief supply chain officer and the chief sustainability officer need to work with the CMO. They need to be kind of one team, because it's about what MacArthur Foundation was talking about, the design at the beginning, right? The second thing is we need to begin to lead the consumer. Because if this is the future of coffee, the future of cocoa, you can't just say, no, well, consumers don't care. You need to find the way to engage, create that understanding, create that movement, because it's the future of your organization at the end of the day. And marketing has amazing power today to really inform and engage people through big data. I mean, there's so much data points that companies have about us, you know, even kids of 14 years old, you know, through social media, etc. So it's really a marketing challenge, right? And the third one is really kind of how do we make sure that whatever marketing says is really connected to impact. So because greenwash is a big, big risk for this agenda because it damages the trust on consumers. So that's my 2 cents on this one.
Thank you, Santiago. So thank you all, but before we wrap up the conversation, maybe you were talking about the future. We'll keep on with that a little bit. To have a little bit of futurology here. Julius, maybe would you like to tell us what you think the nutrition ecosystem will be like in, say, 10 years?
Yeah, of course. I think there's a lot of black and white thinking at the moment. For example, when I speak to founders that work on some sort of lab-grown meat, they always tell me in 10 years it's only going to be lab-grown meat. There's no longer going to be any animal-based meat. At the same time, when speaking to a founder working on regenerative agriculture, he's going to tell me, oh, the future is all about regenerative agriculture and so on. I personally believe, let's say 10 years from now, it's going to be a healthy mix of all of the previously described, leading to an overall more sustainable but also more resilient food production system, because I think another point that we also always need to keep in mind is the whole topic of food security. We have a growing population. By 2050, it's expected, we expect it to be 10 billion people on the planet. And in the end, feeding all of those people is not going to be easy, and with our current system, probably not going to be possible. So we need change, and I think in the end it's going to be a more sustainable mix of the previously mentioned technologies.
Thank you, Julius. Santiago, you want to add something to your predictions?
We have Daniel there, the founder of the Rainforest Alliance, just arrived. So I'm going to, use a kind of a concept we shared in Ghana on a board meeting. I'm going to be a little bit more binary, right? Food today is one of the biggest problems we have, right? So 80% greenhouse gas deforestation, 25% greenhouse gas emissions. 4 out of 5 people living in rural areas live in poverty, right? But at the same time, it's this kind of amazing force, 40% of global employment, 12% of global GDP. So it's this amazing force that can actually be probably the most effective and fastest, tool to tackle climate, biodiversity, and social development if you do it right. So, for me, the future of food needs to be a future where, agriculture, food production play to create a world where people and nature can thrive in harmony together, which is the mission of the Rainforest Alliance. And because if it doesn't, right, when you look at scenarios and trends on, coffee production, cocoa production, there is a real issue around land, to keep that production because of the lack of resilience and lack of adaptation to climate change. So if we don't begin to accelerate these regen practices, probably we won't have coffee to enjoy and also, air and water to enjoy. So, yeah.
So, Allon, are you optimistic about 10 years from now?
Yeah, I think I'm kind of aligned with what you described. I think it will be still at the middle of the bridge. We won't have go through it. And I'm pretty confident for one kind of supply chain where it will be all traceable with no deforestation and circularity at the end. So maybe in the Western world we'll kind of live in this kind of country for part of our value chain. But I'm kind of guessing that not the whole world will be as it.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you to each of you.
Thank you, Catherine.
For
this
conversation.